Welcome back, everybody, to a new episode of Podcast on the Brink. What a difference a week makes for this show. Last episode, we were talking about Indiana's 3-game losing streak, and since that time, the Hoosiers have knocked off Wisconsin and Illinois in consecutive games. Two really good defensive performances. To help us break down last night's win over Illinois, Ryan Phillips. You know him from the Assembly Call, and he's also a senior writer at the Big Lead. Ryan, welcome back to the show.
Hey, always great to be here, Alex.
So let's just start with last night's game. You called it hands down the best IU performance of the season on Twitter last night. What stood out to you, and why do you call it the best performance of the season so far?
Well, I think if you're looking at the best performances, you could look at Xavier on the road. North Carolina they beat at home, but North Carolina was kind of down at that point. And then, you could look at the Wisconsin game as well. But Wisconsin was out without its leading scorer, and it's a home game. I think going on the road to Illinois and winning that game the way they did, being up, about 15 points for most of the game in that range, sometimes up to 20. I think 21 was the peak. And the way they played, the way they moved the ball offensively, and then the aggressiveness they showed defensively carrying over from the Wisconsin game, I thought, I think the thing about this program over the past decade or so is they've had real problems maintaining success and following up success with more success. And so I think it was easy to see after the Wisconsin game, well, they're going on the road at Illinois. It's probably not going to be a good story because a lot of times with this program, you win a big game or get a separation win where you can kind of breathe for a second, and then it's right back to the brink of disaster. And being able to follow that up with the way they did, Trace Jackson-Davis, one of the best games of his career, I think, clearly. I thought that was a huge performance, and I thought it was the best win of the season because they went on the road in the Big Ten and won, and the way they won, by about 15. So that's why I made that statement. I think that you could make arguments for a few wins, but that one to me was the most complete, and given the situation, maybe the most important.
So we've seen in the past some Mike Woodson coached IU teams go on the road and get big leads and give them away, most famously last season at Wisconsin. They were up 22 and let the Badgers come back, and I think Wisconsin ended up winning that game by 5. This season, earlier in the year, Iowa, they go up 21 and lose that game. This game, I had written a note. They were up 19 because I was thinking to myself, how's this going to play out? We've seen this story play out. What, in your eyes, was different last night that didn't happen in those two previous performances?
Well, one thing I'd like to say is I long for the days when you had an 18-point lead in the second half and you felt safe. And I just don't think that's the case anymore. You know what I think the difference was, honestly, it came down to Trace Jackson-Davis really, really wanting that game. And I think he always does, but he was able to erase it. There were a couple times when things got tight or when they went on a run, and Trace just took over. And there were a couple of times he got lucky, like a ball bounced off a leg right to him, and then he just went around the rim for a layup on one, or a pass into the post got batted around, and he happened to grab it, and the Illinois defender was out of position, was able to finish. Trey Galloway made 2 really good plays back to back at a point where Indiana really needed it. And I just think that guys stepped up in the moments. A lot of times when those leads disappear, it's because Indiana will have a bad offensive possession, and then the other team will come down and hit a 3, and they'll change momentum. Then they'll follow that up. Instead of answering, they'll have another bad possession, which the one thing you need to do when things aren't going your way is slow everything down and run a play, run your best offensive play. Even if you don't score, if you get a good shot and kind of get back into rhythm, it sort of takes that run away a little bit. And I felt like they made the plays when they needed to, and that's been absent. A lot of times when things start going badly for this program, not just under Mike Woodson, mind you, under Archie Miller, sort of the end of Tom Crean, when things start going bad, instead of stepping up and making a change, things just compound and it turns into a snowball. And that didn't happen against Illinois. Illinois had some runs. I think they had a 7-0 run and a 9-0 run. But Indiana then stopped the bleeding and went on their own run and answered it. And they punched back. And that has not been a consistent theme for this program.
One of the more surprising decisions that I've seen from a coaching perspective in the Big Ten this year happened last night in the State Farm Center. Brad Underwood, who I think he's a pretty good coach. I mean, he obviously started out pretty slow at Illinois, and I think changed things around defensively. I think it was that third season, and they've really had it rolling since. Been one of the upper tier programs in the league, but he decides to guard Trace Jackson Davis one-on-one last night, which, starting out that way is one thing, but continuing it throughout the entire game when the guy's shooting layups and dunks was a head-scratching decision. As you were watching that, Ryan, what did you just think of that decision? And is that, do you agree that's one of the more, I don't want to call it stupid, but basically, I mean, it wasn't working clearly. And I was just a little bit surprised that they continued that throughout the entire 40 minutes.
First of all, as an IU alum and fan, Brad, thank you for that decision. I appreciate it. I don't know. I mean, clearly he thought with Dane Dange's footwork, he could maybe, stay with him. And Dange moves really well for a post guy, but maybe it's the way they played Trace in the past straight up with Kofi Coburn. He thought that they could do that again. That did not work. And I agree with you. I think that people sort of overestimate how often teams radically change things in game. I mean, there are subtle changes, and there are, okay, they're shading this guy, so we're gonna run him off screens and do this. And, there's little things you can adjust, but it's all within a system, and it's all has to work within a system because you're not reinventing the wheel mid-game when you're down 10. And a lot of times when you practice something during the week, it's hard to go out of it in the first 5 minutes when it's not working. And it's clear Illinois practiced not doubling Trace Jackson Davis. And then because in the second half, they tried to run a few at him and they didn't know who to double with. They didn't know what time to go. Like, do you go on the bounce? Do you go on the catch? Do you go after he starts backing down? Do you go once he's a couple steps inside? Like, they didn't know what to do. And so I think that they just, forget it. We're not going to do it. But they clearly wanted to prevent IU from being able to shoot threes. And I think that the thought here was that Illinois is going to knock down threes. Indiana doesn't shoot that many threes, but they have a couple guys who can knock them down. If we prevent those guys from going off, we're going to win this game just based on a deluge of threes, and Dange is going to play well enough defensively that Jackson Davis isn't going to go for 35. The philosophy was wrong, and I agree. You can call it stupid, Alex. It was stupid. He's the best post player in the conference, and you offer no resistance to him. So, again, I'm happy and thrilled that happened. I don't think Indiana should get used to that, and certainly they're going to have to find ways to work out of the double team with Trace a little more smoothly than they have this year. But yeah, it was puzzling, and it was puzzling again. You instinctively you're like, well, change your entire defense. It's not really easy to do that on the fly in the middle of the game.
Indiana finally feels like they're kind of adjusting to not having Xavier Johnson and Race Thompson these last couple of games. Is that kind of what you're seeing as well? And obviously those 3 straight losses, a lot of people, this as well as anybody, it's kind of a sky is falling mentality when Indiana loses one game. And then when it gets to 3-game losing streak, it's really a catastrophe for a lot of the fan base. But to me, it kind of feels like they've had a little bit of a reset here, and guys being able to adjust to their new roles, in particular Jordan Geronimo, who, quite frankly, after the first 2 games he started, I think there was a strong case to take him out of the starting lineup. Credit to Mike Woodson for whatever he was able to talk to him about on the side and kind of getting him refocused. Has played really well the last 2 games. Trey Galloway, Jalen Hood-Schifino have both played better, the last 2 games. I mean, how much of this is just Indiana getting used to the personnel now and what it's been like having those 2 guys out now for an extended period of time?
I'll tell you something. And those 3 losses, I was very critical of Mike Woodson because I didn't see a lot of even small adjustments, and I didn't see a lot of coaching going. I saw a lot of stick to the system. This is what we do. Just run it. Just be better. The last 2 games, I've seen him doing a lot of coaching on the sideline and a lot of instruction and a lot of, last night he called a timeout really quickly when Illinois started playing well and lit into the players and said, this is, change just to get them refocused. I've seen a lot better coaching from him the last 2 games, and I think that he's adjusting to not having a senior point guard who he can put things in cruise control with, and not having a guy like Ray Thompson who's going to do a lot of the dirty work for you. That's going to make it so maybe they don't an opposing team doesn't get as many second chance points or doesn't have such a focus on Trace Jackson Davis and has to respect the other post guy. So yes, I think that the players are getting used to not having those guys. Jordan Geronimo all of a sudden being thrust into the starting lineup was not something anybody expected to happen this year. Jalen Hood-Schifino, I think that part of the appeal of having him was that it would give a ball handler, give Xavier Johnson a little bit of a break, and that they could split duties. And now it's all on him. I mean, he's playing more minutes than anybody on Indiana for the season so far. So I do think it's getting used to those spots, getting used to those roles. But at the same time, it's the coaching staff getting used to not having those guys and knowing who to go. And honestly, the strings they've pulled as far as substitution patterns and things like that have worked the last 2 games. Will it always work? We don't know. We'll see what happens. I mean, look, they got a stiff test on Sunday. They didn't get to bask in this one very long. They got a stiff test on Sunday. And, as a coach, you're only as good as your last game. And so the key will be, and I said this coming out of Wisconsin, and I kind of always say this, is how do you deal with that success? And how do you build on it, or do you take a step back? And unfortunately, you have to always keep building on it because your goal is to be at your best at the end of the season. And so they've got to build on this, and they've got to play that aggressive defense. They can't relax for a second in this conference or you're going to get buried. And they're still 3-4 in conference when they probably should be, 5-2? And so, yeah, it's really, I've seen improvements from the players and the coaches, and I do feel like you're getting better coaching out of Mike Woodson the last couple games.
As much as we all break down every decision that Woodson makes and try to overanalyze each game, how beneficial do you think it is just for the program in general when you look at the fan base that kind of lives and breathes with every game? You're adored if you lose, or if you win a game, and then if you lose, the sky's falling. I think a lot of people were like, when Woodson said a couple weeks ago, I'm not hitting the panic button, or like, well, it's time to hit the panic button for a lot of the fans. But that mentality from Woodson, how important do you think that is with this program in particular, to have somebody that's really not gonna, live and die with each game, and kind of just look at the season as a whole and realize that there's going to be some bumps in the road, but it's really just about moving on to the next game when you do have a loss?
Yeah, I mean, even keel demeanor is always important for a program, and I think that the sense of urgency this year from fans is the fact that I think everybody knows how loaded this roster is. I mean, I wrote earlier in the year, it's, as far as pure talent goes, it's the best roster Indiana's had in 20 years, in my opinion, just on pure talent. How those guys play and how they're deployed, that's a different conversation. But talent-wise, this roster is loaded. And I think people knew that Indiana has to make hay this year because next year, a lot of those guys are going to be gone. And so, and the roster, it's probably going to be a rebuilding year next year for the most part. I don't think you can portal your way into a championship. And so you can be pretty darn good from the portal. But this is the peak year, and you've got seniors, and you've got veterans, and you've got a guy who's probably going to be a first-round NBA draft pick. This was a year that Mike Woodson in year 2 had to make hay. And when you start off in conference 1-4 and look pretty bad doing it, it's not just the way they were losing games. It wasn't just they were losing games. It was how they were losing. Like, you got Kansas game where they just didn't show up. I mean, people see patterns, and Indiana's got a pretty smart fan base. Now, it is a very reactionary fan base, we all know, but I think that they were rightfully concerned, and it's probably good for the team as a whole that they had a guy up top who wasn't hitting the panic button. But yeah, I think that certainly whether you're hitting the panic button or not, when you're losing those games the way you're losing them, it's time to make adjustments at the very least, and not just, it's going to work, we just got to do it, it's going to work. And you've seen some adjustments. You've seen some adjustments defensively. You've seen some adjustments offensively. They're moving Trace Jackson Davis to the middle of the floor more instead of just a straight wing post, a straight block post up, things like that, which worked at the end of last year, and then Indiana really hasn't used as much this year. So I, I do think it's great that he projects sort of an even demeanor, but there also has to be a sense of urgency a little bit about this season, I think, in the program.
For some reason, this game in particular was billed as this big rivalry game on social media, and then we get to the actual broadcast, and I keep hearing the word rivalry from Jason Benetti, who White Sox announcer, love him, think he does a terrific job, and Stephen Bardo, whatever you think of him, obviously he played for Illinois and played in a lot of games against Indiana, but was it weird to you how much this kind of got blown up into a thing? Like, I grew up in Southern Indiana, and it was always Purdue and Kentucky. Those are Indiana's rivals. And I think you can even make an argument in, the last 10 to 15 years, Michigan State is as big of a rival as Illinois. The whole thing was just kind of weird how it got blown into this big thing. You had Illinois assistant coach tweeting a video of him chest bumping Eric Gordon before that game, and Illinois had this big hype video. The whole thing was just a little bit odd to me. Do you agree with that? And just your whole reaction to this being blown up into some big rivalry when clearly Purdue is Indiana's rival, and I think you can make an argument that Kentucky would be ahead of Illinois as well in terms of rivalry.
100%, I agree with you. When I enrolled at Indiana in 2003, we had the Bourbon Bowl in football with Kentucky, and then you had the Kentucky game every year, and you had the Purdue game. Now, they don't play Kentucky anymore, hopefully, in football or basketball, and hopefully that's going to change in the future. I think we all know it needs to change, and I think even Kentucky recognizes that needs to change. So hopefully that reignites. I can get people thinking like, well, Indiana and Kentucky don't play each other anymore. So right now the rivalry is kind of on the back burner. But Purdue is the rival, and Kentucky is the traditional rival. And I think that if you went to Indiana or grew up in Indiana, which I didn't, but I know you did, Kentucky is the one you always point to as because I feel like most teams have an out-of-conference rival that's a local thing and an in-conference rival. And you can't have like 7 rivals, and so Illinois probably looks at Indiana as a rival. There's a lot of history there. But when I was at school, we did not consider Illinois a rival. We considered it no different than another Big Ten team that you would play, like a Michigan or an Iowa or a Michigan State. And so, but I get from their perspective, it is different. It's the closest school in the conference. And, Indiana has a richer basketball tradition. And so you like knocking them off. And so you probably do feel like it's a rivalry game. I don't think it is. I don't think it's a true rivalry. I think they're just a good, there have been some good matchups over the years, and it's another Big Ten, I guess, quote unquote rival. But it's not one of the main rivals for Indiana. It never has been.
Yeah, felt a little forced.
Forced.
Just the whole build up, and then I was thinking, maybe once we actually get to the game being played, we're not going to talk about this, but sure enough, we've got graphics on FS1, and we've got the announcers talking about it. It was just a little odd to me. But this next stretch of games coming up for Indiana, obviously Xavier Johnson, Race Thompson, doesn't seem like either one of those guys are coming back soon, at least not before the end of the month, just based on what Mike Woodson has said about them not being in practice and kind of in the rehab stage at this point. I mean, how important is it, though, these next 4 games? You got Michigan State at home, at Minnesota, Ohio State, who's really struggling at home, and then at Maryland. It feels like this is, Indiana's a game under 500 right now. It feels to me like this is a very important stretch coming up to kind of get back to at least 500. And then you hope, the schedule's a little bit tougher to end the season, but maybe if you get those 2 guys back early, mid-February, you got a chance to get some momentum going into the most crucial part of the season.
Yeah, the at Maryland game I'm looking at as kind of the swing game of this stretch, because they're struggling, but you are going on the road far away, and Indiana has not been successful on the road under Mike Woodson in general. We saw that change against Illinois. Can you keep that up? Playing at the Barn is always hard, but Minnesota is so bad that, the bottom of the Big Ten is never awful, but, it's still a Big Ten team, so it's a higher floor than other places. But you've got to win at the Barn. Michigan State on Sunday, that's going to be a tough game because Michigan State's playing really well right now. And they almost beat Purdue. I thought they should have beat Purdue. I thought they kind of got jobbed out of that game a little bit at the end. And then, yeah, Ohio State at home, you've got to win that game, I feel like, just with the way Ohio State's playing. So you'd like to win 3 of these 4. And if you lose, if you beat Michigan State, you can kind of forgive a loss at Maryland because, again, it's a tough road environment and everything. And then, you welcome Purdue to town after that. So you've got to make some hay here. And I think winning 3 of 4 is not an out of the question projection here and a goal. Certainly, if you win against Michigan State on Sunday, you really set yourself up well because you don't feel as bad if you lose one of those other 3. But yeah, I do think this is a crucial stretch because then you get, Purdue in town and then you host Rutgers, and Indiana just does not play well against Rutgers. It's a terrible matchup for Indiana. So you never know how that's going to go. And then you got to go on the road to Michigan, who's a talented team. Regardless of how they're playing, they're really talented and they can break out at any time. And so that's a really tough 3-game stretch there. So this next 4, they've got to accomplish some things, and it, again, with the way they're playing right now, you feel like, okay, maybe you can do that. A week and a half ago, this looked like, we're staring 1-8 in the conference in the face. But these last 2 games, they've looked a lot different, and it's felt a lot better.
Do you still see a high ceiling with this team once they get everybody back in terms of being able to have a deep tournament run, or, have they put themselves maybe in a position where they've got too many losses? It's going to be hard to get a favorable seed and have a chance to advance.
The way the tournament is now, you don't really, it helps to have a higher seed, but you don't really need one if you've got the talent. And because there's so much parity that you just have to be better on that day. And I do think a fully loaded Indiana with everybody back and playing, and if they're playing defense, the key is the defense. We all know that. Like the key is how aggressive they're playing defensively. In the last 2 games, if they look like this, or even 80% of this the rest of the way, they're going to be a team nobody wants to play because you've got an All-American center. You've got a wing shooter who you've got to respect in Miller Kopp, even though he's not getting shots. It feels like every time he gets one, he makes it right now. And then you've got, a stud freshman point guard who can go off at any time, and Jalen Hood-Schifino, and is becoming, by the way, a note on he's become a much better passer as the season is going on. He's really figuring that out. And then even off the bench, you got guys like Tamar Bates who can light it up. You've got, again, Jordan Geronimo, who's a starter now, but is going to go back to bench. You've got that energy. You've got Trey Galloway. You've got Xavier Johnson, who was one of the better point guards in the country at the end of last season. So this is a loaded roster if it's playing the way it's supposed to play and if everybody's healthy. 2 things that have not happened this year consistently. So, yeah, I think this team's capable of a run, of course. And again, anytime you have Trace Jackson Davis, you've got a chance to win because that guy can just take over games. So I do see a high ceiling for this team if it can get and stay right. And that's the big question is, are these guys being deployed properly? Are they being used properly? Is the offense adjusting to its strengths? All of that stuff. And is the defense playing with intensity? It's a lot of questions to answer, but on a pure ability basis, this team could absolutely make a run if they're healthy.
Purdue 7-1 in the Big Ten, 2 games ahead in the loss column. Is it a foregone conclusion now that Purdue's going to win the Big Ten this season in your eyes? And is there anybody that can maybe challenge them? I'm looking at the standings, and there's the KenPom projection. There's a lot of projected 11-9s, 10-10s, 9-10s. Feels to me that there's a lot of teams in the middle, but I just don't know that anybody's going to challenge Purdue.
It's really hard to see that changing. Zach Edey's so difficult to deal with, especially because apparently he never fouls anybody. He's just got the reputation that he's going to get away with all that with anything. Officials just don't know how to officiate him, and quite frankly, they don't know how to officiate in the conference period. But I just think Purdue has such a well-rounded team. Those freshmen are playing so well. Way above where anybody thought they would be playing. And you've got some depth there. And look, Matt Painter's teams, however much I hate to say it, Matt Painter's teams are just very well coached, and they play very, very well. And they do everything. They hit threes, they rebound. They've got the big guy in the middle to score and rebound and do all of that. And so it's really tough to see them falling off that perch. Now, how they do in March, that's anybody's guess, because it seems that every year in March they are exhausted or just flummoxed by the tournament or whatever, and they fall apart when they shouldn't. But that team is really good, and it's way better than everybody thought it would be. Everyone thought it would be Zach Edey and nobody else this year when Ivy went pro, and that has not been the case. And a bunch of guys have stepped up. The two freshmen are spectacular, and Indiana fans are going to have to get used to seeing those guys for a long time and hating them for a long time.
This feels like another year where we're going to have a lot of teams from the Big Ten in the bracket, but how many of those teams are actually going to be capable of advancing and winning games beyond Purdue? Is there any team that you look at? Obviously, we've talked a lot about Indiana, so kind of throw them out of the picture as well as Purdue. But any other team, any teams you look at and say, if these guys put it together, they have a chance to make a Sweet 16 Elite Eight type of run, or is this going to be another year where we're by the round of 32, we're looking, oh, there's only 3 Big Ten teams left, and then by the Sweet 16, there's one left, and everybody's talking about, well, once again, the Big Ten gets 9 or 10 teams in, and nobody wins any games.
I really like Michigan State. I like the way they're playing. If I had to pick a team other than Purdue to make a run, it would be Michigan State. I love the way that Tyson Walker plays. Joey Hauser can hit a 3 for you and is playing a lot of minutes. So he's playing 33 minutes for them, or something, roughly 33 minutes for them, and is hitting over 40% of his threes. Hogarth's a solid guard, and I really think that Sissoko is really improved as well in the interior. Even though he's not scoring a whole lot, I just feel like he has improved a ton. So I like Michigan State. I like the way they play. I know it's the classic. Even when his teams bow out early, everybody's like, "Wow, Tom Izzo's a great coach." Well, he is a great coach. I don't think he's had the teams over the last couple of years that he's used to having and that he had in the past. Because frankly, it's hard to recruit to Lansing, and it's always going to be hard to recruit to Lansing. And I think that he's gotten players, but maybe not the kind of guys he wants to fit his system perfectly. I like this team. I really do. They took Purdue down to the wire, and as I said, I think they should have won that game. And so I think that's the challenger for Purdue this year. If Purdue falters, would be Michigan State, and I think that's a team built to make a run because they shoot it well. They have good guards, and I think the post players have gotten much better. And those are the two elements you need in the tournament. You need guys who can hit shots. You need good guard play in the first. Certainly in the first weekend, you need good guard play to get out of the first weekend. I feel like then it kind of becomes focused on post and kick out and threes. But yeah, I think they have all the elements you want to make a run. And so I like what I've seen from them. Again, though, in this conference, it feels like whoever's riding high, 2 weeks later, they're buried and we're reading their obituary, and then they pop back up. And you're right, that middle is bloated this year. It's very bloated in the middle of the conference, a lot of parity. Anybody can beat anybody any night. And so it's real hard to get a read on who could be, possibly make a Final Four run when they're getting beat up by other good Big Ten teams.
Ryan, the assembly call obviously continues to roll along. You guys have done a great job building an audience. I was looking last night on the live stream on YouTube. I know you weren't on the show, but I saw at one point there was 800 or 900 people watching live. That's a pretty good number of people. Just what's it been like just seeing the community there continue to grow? And when are you guys going to do your annual trip back to Bloomington this year? When's that going to be? And what's I guess what's the just big picture, what has it meant to you, I guess, to be a part of that community and see it to continue to blossom like it has?
Well, we're in our like 12th year, I think 11th year, and I think it's 11th year, 12th season. And for the first 2 years, I think we had 10 people listening, and I think we were related to 7 of them. So it's been really fun to watch this grow. As you know, I mean, you run one of the best fan sites around, regardless of Indiana. Just one of the best, and you've seen your community grow, and it's really gratifying because this community cares so much about basketball, and we all do too, or we would do this. And so it's been the best part has been meeting other people. We do come to town, and we'll be in town February 4th for the Purdue game. Plans for what we're doing are kind of in flux because it's a bit of a crazy weekend for everybody. Just follow at Assembly Call if you guys want to come meet us. We're going to announce where we're going to be, and everybody can come visit with us. We're more than happy to spend time talking Indiana basketball with you. But yeah, it's been, this was started as something where we basically would talk to our friends about games after games, and we just decided to put it on the air. And meeting Jared and Andy and Coach, I mean, those guys are like family now. And so what you see on the air is real. We are all close. We all give each other crap all the time. That's not forced. That's 100% real. But the most gratifying part has just been, as you said, there were 900 people watching live last night, and just being able to connect with those people and bring people together. There are people, who follow us who have become really good friends with each other. And it has been gratifying. And it's something we're really humbled by and happy about. And again, as you know, this is a magical fan base. It really is. Well, the good and the bad. It's all those extremes. And it's really fun to be a part of. And we love doing it.
Yeah, you guys have done a tremendous job with the show. It's been awesome, just as somebody that listens to the post game show and seeing what you guys have been able to build and coming on Assembly Call Radio every once in a while. It's tremendous. So thanks Ryan for coming on the show this week. We really appreciate it.
Anytime, Alex. You know that.
Thanks, everybody, for listening to this week's episode of Podcast on the Brink. As Ryan said, you can follow Assembly Call at Assembly Call. You can follow Ryan on Twitter at Rumors and Rants. He will have plenty of rants for sure. Not sure about the rumors, but definitely the rants. We'll be back again next week with another episode of Podcast on the Brink. Good to have a show where we're talking about a couple of Indiana wins as we did this week. Next week, obviously, Sunday, Indiana will close out this week at home against Michigan State and then go to Minnesota on the road Wednesday. So if you enjoy the show, please do us a favor by leaving us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Leave us a rating on Spotify, and we'll be back soon with another episode of Podcast on the Brink.